I'm not going to spend a lot of time with trying to sort of summarize the kinds of conversations we're going to have here. But I do want to actually revisit a conversation I had here precisely, I mean, not exactly at this space, but in a conference earlier that we had done with IGC and ADRI, and we had spoken about what empowerment means and why is it defined in the way that it is. And what we had come to at the end of that panel was that empowerment still has meaning. And I think what we are realizing more and more is that it has meaning only when there is a structure behind it. There is some form of framework around it. When there is some kind of, it's not, as you know, in the morning the conversations have been about, well, yes, women have been given certain kinds of power, but only so that it doesn't really disturb the status quo. As long as when it starts to disturb the status quo, then it starts to become sort of, you have pushbacks, you have sort of regressive forces coming at play. So let's talk a little bit about that. But I also want to focus and direct our conversations on three particular themes so that we don't have a lot of time. But I think I'm picking up also on the themes that largely have already been addressed. So one is work, and I mean work as in all work. Care work, paid work, unpaid work, all of it. And I don't mean livelihoods, I mean work. And then hunger, because that's something that we have seen for the past year, is hunger is a prominent thing, and I don't mean food security, because I want to deliberately move away from the kinds of these labels, primarily because I think hunger as a concept is important for us to engage away also from food security. And then, of course, the primary thing that, Madam, actually you spoke about in the beginning, right at the beginning, which is freedom. What does freedom mean? Why do we want to engage with the concept of freedom in the ideas of empowerment? So let me start this conversation by introducing everyone. I'll do this very briefly. I'm very sorry that I will not go into your histories and your backgrounds, primarily because we have a lot to discuss. And I'm sure that your expertise will be showcased in the way that you engage with this subject area. So briefly, we have Madam Harjot Kaur Bamra, who is the Managing Director, Women Development Corporation, Government of India, and also the Principal Secretary cum Mines Commissioner, Mines Department. We have Devesh Sehra, who's the Secretary, SCA/ST Department, Government of Bihar. We have Asmita Gupta. We have Paramita Majumdar. And we have Sugandha Munshi, who will speak in various capacities in their own experience with gender budgeting, gender mainstreaming, and doing work on gender and health. So without further ado, I'm going to start the first question. Now I'm going to talk about work and what we've realized in the last, and I want to bring the focus back to what we've experienced in the last, why we're all wearing these masks and socially distancing ourselves, is that what we found in over and over again in all of the seminars that we have seen is that women are working more and less at the same time. Women are working more in the house. They are catering to n number of family members who have come back, especially in Bihar and UP. This is a major form of work. And they're also working less. They are not able to find work. MNREGA work is not something that they're having access to. So there is a simultaneous increase and decrease of how women are working. So from your experience, from all of your collective experience, what do you think the relationship is of work and empowerment? Because that has been one of the significant sort of indicators, significant life experiences, and through your lens. And I don't want you to also just engage with work in the kinds of livelihoods that women are doing, but also in terms of time poverty and in terms of identity as a worker, because I think that is also very central. How a woman works and who she is when she's working. Like all of us working professionals, we don't think of ourselves always as women. We are thinking of ourselves as professional women. And I think I would like you to sort of address that, and we will do it either round robin or anyone who'd like to sort of start.
Thanks, Nivedita. Yeah, so I think this is a very important issue, and which is why forums like these are important, where we have researchers as well as people in the bureaucracy and practitioners who can talk about different problems, and then we can also deliberate the research experience that we get from our work, and there is this dialogue that happens between the two. So I'm very happy that some of these issues have already been raised by Harjot ma'am this morning, and also by Dr. Jha and other speakers that spoke today. So I think, Nivedita, the answer to your question is, first, when we are in women empowerment, women work and empowerment, we have to realize that it's not, so these issues are not only women's issues, these are broader economic issues. Um, these are related very deeply to the economic growth and development in the country. Like ma'am said, that there is this question of distribution of resources. Dr. Jha already mentioned about the demand constraint in the economy. So, for example, some of my own work has focused on how economic growth at odds with the with the principle of gender inequality. And what we find is that per se, that more growth we have, there should be gender equality that should be happening. That's what the international evidence suggests. But the kind of growth that we saw in India over the last few decades was in such a way that it was not creating enough jobs. There was a demand constraint. In general, jobs were not created, although we were growing as an economy, but mostly it was service sector-led growth, which was high-skilled and high returns kind of growth. So we did not have enough jobs for unskilled or low-skilled workers. So as a result, what happened is that there was a lot of competition for these low-skilled, low-wage jobs, and most of the constraints, so from the point of view of industries, what they ended up doing is that make the workers work long hours. And given our society, so here, as a result of the nature of growth of the Indian economy, it so happened that most of the industries started to get most out of the working hours. So if you hire 10 employees, you make sure that they work long hours so that, and you pay them low wages, so that you are competitive in the level of, in face of the global market and competition. And this was one main reason why women lost out in getting manufacturing or industry jobs, as opposed to other places like Southeast Asia and others, or say like historical experience of US and Europe, where the nature of production was such that it was not about getting most out. Productivity was more by increasing the returns to labor as well as capital. But here what the industries followed was, I would not say exploitation, but getting most out of the working hours. And women were one of the main people who lost out because of this. So now, in this context, what we see is that we do have to accept certain things. Like, as a result of that, what happened is that they were always the secondary worker given in the household. And only when they were forced due to economic circumstances, they went out to work. And they would always do work which was below their potential. So one of the ways in which I think this entire question of women and work can be addressed is to question the nature of production in the economy, to question the or to re-examine the kind of growth that we want. That is one issue. Now, there are other issues as well. Again, the research evidence suggests that whenever there's a negative income shock to the households, women go out to work, but, or I would say whenever there's a negative income shock to the households, the way women of that household respond differs by their economic status. So if you belong to a very rich household, you face a negative income shock, you would respond in a different way than if you are an extremely poor household. And normally what we find is that if you are poor, in those households particularly, a negative shock like the COVID crisis or any other shock would disproportionately affect the girls, and that kind of leads to a vicious cycle. So as soon as, if you are ultra poor, then basically the best way to deal with the shock is to get the girls out of school. But if you are not so poor, even in the poor households, people try to put the girls in school as much as possible. So women go out and do different kinds of unskilled work, and they try to keep the girls at school as much as they can. But then again, again it comes back to the question of jobs. When you do these cost benefit analysis, कि अगर हम 4 साल और पढ़ेंगे तो उसके बाद कौन सा जॉब मिलेगा, उसमें कैसे wages मिलेंगे. So I think from the point of view of government, it's important to understand what is the how is the global economy moving towards, what are the jobs that are there in the future. For example, like there's a lot of talk about in future production is going to be less and less labor intensive. It will use more of computerization. So how do we deal with all that? How do we change our training processes so that our women are at least ready with that kind of program? Because whenever in government training programs and other things, we see that like ma'am was saying, that we are always inclined toward the creative side. So women are taught painting and stitching and all that. But are those jobs available? What do you do with that?
But I'm
So-
wondering whether that is a chicken and an egg problem, right? Like, are you geared towards, sorry. Oh,
Yeah.
I can't,
Yes, sorry.
I'm wondering whether that is a gendered sort of chicken and egg problem, which is that we assume women are much more geared towards creative and therefore you're pushed towards it, or it's the other way around, which is you don't have maths teachers, so therefore you don't really feel inclined towards math. So I would like to open up this question to other members of the panel about your relation. I mean, what do you think about work and empowerment?
Good morning, everyone, and thanks to Adri and IGC for having me here. I really don't know, I'm just a learner, still learning to understand what all is happening across, and having worked with the government for some more than 10 years, the experience of both the sectors, be it the government or the non-government, I do have that understanding of the limitations. Like for me, it's very important to understand that how we understand the term, the practical gender need and the strategic gender need. I mean, it's very important now for the government to actually analyze and understand, because what is it that we, want to focus. It's really, really important, because in terms of strategic need, what is it that, as she said, in terms of, infrastructure, in terms of education, because these things are really not going to threaten the entire social structure that we have. But in terms of other issues, be it, property rights, or be it in terms of productivity, the way the farmers, what all is happening that you see, in terms of dowry, in terms of the son preferences, these are really, core issues which really one has to ask. And what are we doing? It's really not enough to have those piece of legislation. Like to me, paid work, unpaid work, I mean, there are host of reasons, and one can, always, of course, not from the economist's angle, but in terms of time use data, the recent time use data that we have, I mean, it's 94% women in the unpaid sector, and within a day, within this 24 hours, it's 18% women giving that 18% in their whatever activities that they do, and it's not even 2% for men. So, and during this COVID times, we have seen that. So, I am really concerned that what is in terms of education also, in terms of unpaid work, it's really important that within the household now, what have we seen, the daughters and the sons, whatever level, even during COVID times, we have reinforced that stereotyping within the household and that work, so that for the generations to come also, the unpaid work, the domestic responsibility, will again, lie on women. I mean, we really need more on, the daughters and the sons. So that patriarchy which is there, which is like one of the key issue to me, to actually have things, this is what the care work we have talked about. Anganwadi workers, asha workers, it's okay, the women are providers of the care work within the four walls of the home, and so even if they are out, it doesn't really threaten. You teach your girls and boys within the household, you can go and do your care, and so it's very difficult for them to for them to organize and then to bargain for those things. So to me, and what I think Ashmita has already pointed, this digital inclusion. I mean, it's extremely important now, because the gap that we have, if I can just, quickly say, I mean, many of you are aware of, but the data that we have for Bihar is, for the government, affordable internet availability is one thing that has to be. It's not enough to have those broadband connections. I mean, you have already heard that, what it happens in terms of Madam Jha's presentation, that for a phone also to use the internet connection, how to use in the kind of monitoring, and we do have, khap panchayats there, looking also paid, different dynamics really play. And so in terms of internet users, we have 39.4% men and 70% of women using internet, and this is for the rural areas, and for the urban is 30. It's like having internet connections, actually using it, actually knowing how to. This is the recent data of NFH's 2019-20. So in terms of that, data is just, as we said, Madam has also said, in terms of just putting the data there, it's there. But in terms of the industry, opening up the sectors, the CSR activities that is there, how do we, where is the dialogue? Where is the analysis? So to me, when we see in terms of paid and unpaid work, from the gender perspective, whatever I understand, whatever we are trying to do is basically, we really need to have that gender analysis done and train more women. And I think it's already been spoken that, how do we have those, even for that example, like the administrative training institutes, or, how are we training women to actually be in that sector? So to me, it's the work is that, that's there. And the other very important thing is, women who are working in the sector, how many of us really feel that work is like for social transformation? Or is it kind of, it's empowering for me, individually empowering? Or is it a practical necessity, a survival agenda? So those issues, one really needs a thorough analysis at the policy level, and then, open up that box for different categories of women, maybe. Thank you.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you that why a woman works, why she has to work, and what that identity brings her is completely reliant on where she's coming from and what that jobs mean for her. And I think the question that you raised about gender norms and gender roles with respect to care work, I think it is also, I think we also put the burden on women to change those, except they are ready. It's just that men are not, right? Like when you look at the differences between care work over the years, right? Look, over the 60 years, there has not been any sort of, please respond. Yes, so there has been no movement shift towards that, and I think part of it is a structural problem. So I'd like to actually invite other members of the panel if they'd like to respond or to engage with the discussion.
Okay, so well, this is a very important question, if you ask me, women and work in today's era, right? Not today, but even previous eras, I would say, since the humanity came into existence. So, when I see this women and work and economic empowerment aspect, Nivedita, what I feel is there are two intrinsic factors behind it. One is self-worth, and the second is your social identity. And that belongs to every strata of women, whether they are, because I worked closely for a decade in Bihar and closely worked with Jivika and WDC in the beginning. Even if I talk about Jivika Didis, the farmers, the women who are working at the grassroots of Bihar, for them also it's two important concepts, self-worth and social identity. Even when we talk about respective bureaucrats, women, as ma'am in the morning highlighted, very, very important and powerful question, even as being a social scientist, and even you, Nivedita, must have felt this, that whenever we go to offices, we are first taken as a woman, rather an individual or a professional. So that's the biggest challenge, I would say, with women in work, and that's the practical thing. Now we have a lot of data which talks about the household chores women are doing, and there is a new debate, I would say, that let's give recognition to homemakers as well. Stop saying them housewife. They also have a lot to contribute, and the value is immense. Like if you ask me personally to work at the household and choose for office, I always run for office. I'll go for office work, because that's not my job. Like I can't do it. So, it's very important to understand that when it comes for women and work, it is also about women to challenge the subordinate positions which they get in the social norms in the environment they belong to. And it's completely, as other panelists also said, it's directly proportional to what ecosystem you belong to. So if I have got an education background and a family which supported us, we women, we also had challenges. So women and work, yes, it's a two-way process, which is about your empowerment and as well as putting yourself ahead of everything. And as the other panelists were saying, not the march past from the one place, take one step ahead wherever you are. So that's what my opinion is about. Thanks, Nivedita.
Anyone else would like to join, have a comment?
This discussion, one of the few things which ma'am here said about women in domestic, just doing the household duties. I would remember NSSO by its calculation by statistics counts this as code 92 and code 93. Okay, 92 is women engaged in domestic duties only. And code 93 is women engaged in domestic duties and other collection of items like, maybe wood or wood stock or whatever, and maybe tailoring and things like that. So these are not counted as a labor, female participation in the labor force. So one issue that when we talk of work is you have to look at paid, unpaid. You have to look at formal, informal. Now, within the formal and informal, also you have to look at the statistic availability. So, typically, our statistical tools or our methodology of statistics does not permit so far. I mean, I could say with some degree of certainty that so far it does not permit us to look at the gender issue more closely. So far, we have looked at statistics just as a number. We looked at it in terms of enumeration, in terms of collection of data, but beyond that we have not traveled. Okay, so statistical tools and in terms of the statistical data is something we must look at in more seriousness when we talk of work in terms of the gender parity or in terms of women. within this subset, again, when we talk of women and work, we like to look at it as one en masse, one common compact mass. Let me tell you this: it's not so. Okay, let us accept that in the Indian context particularly, women are not one complete set. There are subsets within. Okay, when I say subsets within, I'm talking of a horizontal divide also. I'm talking of a horizontal divide in terms of what? In terms of the rural-urban divide. Within that, I'm talking in terms of the poor and the rich divide. Within that, I'm talking of the well-to-do, the socially well-to-do, and the marginalized, and the absolutely dehumanized. When I talk of dehumanized, I'm talking of manual scavengers, okay? So I'm going that far. So if you're looking at women and work, please do not see them as one block, okay? Each one subset requires independent interventions. Yes, as a policy, I would look at a direction. I would look at one sense of direction. Yes, all of them need to come under one umbrella and move in one direction. That's acceptable. But in terms of strategies, as you said, in terms of practical interventions, as you said, I would look them as subsets, and I would like to deal with them as subsets. Okay, that's the other side of it. Now, one of the issues which ma'am said was how the different economic situations hit women vis-a-vis men. Now, one of the statistics I was looking at was in COVID, only 16% of women across India could retain their jobs. As I'm talking of the informal and the formal sector both. Whereas 60% of men could do that, right? So somewhere along we got to understand that the set of legislations that we have, the set of rules, regulations and acts that we have, when we are bent on implementing it in the right spirit, it is here that one of the hits comes. So unfortunately, it's an inverse proportion that's happening. Ideally, so it should be the other way around. One of the, again, the detailed statistics that I was looking at, probably one of the reasons, maybe it's casuistry if you were to call it, but one of the reasons I was looking at when I was reading was that informally when sample surveys were done, most of the informal sector or even the formal sector, why is it that women were laid off more? It was found that the cost, so-called cost, I'm talking purely in economic sense in terms of the economic terms, the cost of retaining the female labor was higher vis-a-vis the male labor. Simply to say, if you were to hire or to retain the female labor, then you'll have to extend all the regulatory benefits. You would also have to ensure that they get n number of hours, and men to that extent could have been put to n plus n number of hours. Okay, that is the kind of mindset that we are living with, and it's not just the mindset from the policy side; it's the mindset also from our daily lives, all across our. It could be even our domestic help at home, as simple as that. Okay, so when we are talking of work, we got to look at that mindset also. We also got to look at why is it that it's sitting in inverse proportion, and do we find some mechanism to append this and get it right? Okay. In terms of work, the other interesting thing, that I was looking at, again purely from the economics perspective. The WEF data for 2020, I was looking at, we in India are sitting at a gender gap index, in terms of gender gap index, at 112th rank out of 153 countries. Okay, 112 out of 153 is bad, I would say. And within this 112, when I talk of the subsets, then think of the last, in this case, the last woman standing. Okay, within this 112, if you were to ask me, the last woman stand, if you were to count only them, we would be probably even beyond 153. That's where we would be standing. So when we talk of work, we should be looking at the entire spectrum and not just the one of it. You know, in terms of stereotyping, I would say, or in terms of typically, you know, what in economics we would learn. We were told that if you hire, I mean, no offense is meant, just in terms of our thinking and understanding how we look at it. If you hire a cook, you add to the GDP, and if the cook is a lady and you marry her, the GDP comes down. Okay, So purely in terms of economics. So somewhere along, our understanding of economy has to incorporate this entire spectrum, which includes, as I said, paid, unpaid, formal, informal. The divides are too many. One of the divides which ma'am mentioned is a digital divide, right? We are talking of an era where disruption is the word, right? The key word in governance. If you were to ask, world across, people are talking of disruption as a term. Now, how hard does any disruption hit the women is a question we have to ask to ourselves. So when we talk of disruption, it is the in thing, it is the innovative thing. When we talk of disruption, we talk of moving forward. But whether that disruption is able to encompass everybody in, yes, no is a question we got to ask. Whether that disruption is able to make sure that the women march ahead, march along, is a question we got to answer. So when we talk of work, these are some of the issues I feel remain unaddressed. So I would always suggest that when we talk of policy intervention, I mean, as a person sitting on this side of governance, I would always say that these are things that do hit my mind, and these are things that I would definitely like to work on. But even in terms of the social thinking, in terms of the economic thinking, I would want that these are some of the issues in terms of work that we should like to incorporate. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think the idea that women are not some undifferentiated mass is a good one. I think that is something. Okay, so I think the point about having an undifferentiated, I mean, not treating women as an undifferentiated mass is actually a very important one. And I think the other, important thing that you mentioned was that the structure in which we engage with, the institutional structure, for example, of employment or of capitalism, as actually Asmita was also talking about, of the structural institution of employment of capitalism does not necessarily allow for certain kinds of, it allows for certain kinds of labor, right? The standard is men, right? So when you engage with that standard, then everything that is differentiated from that standard is obviously not going to be catered to. The question is, how do we change that institutional structure that does not have that one, because the normal standard cannot be the men's standard, which is what we've been actually talking about this whole time anyway. But I think that point is well taken, that we must engage with not just the institutional structures, but also diversity in general. Madam, would you like to close the session on work?
Thank you. Just summing up what I understood from what this technical session was trying to say is, the topic, of course, is economic empowerment, and as the chair had said, work, hunger, and freedom, the three issues. So we've been basically dealing only about work at this point of time. Of course, literacy for women, as everybody said, the more literate the woman is, the more the chances of her finding a job in the job market. Vocational training, we still find that majority of the women or girls, to be more specific, do not go to secondary level. So the first hurdle is to make them at least move towards secondary level education. If they can do that, then definitely their chances of getting a job in the market becomes even brighter. The third is technical education. When we talk about technical education, we find that the levels that the girls have achieved in normal education slither downwards very sharply, and there are very few women in technical education. Of course, things are changing in that field also, but there still remains to be a bastion which women have to at least breach. Access to resources, as Madam Majumdar said, and other speakers have said, that even if you have make everything else for them, the level of access of resources to women would still be not into their liking, because inequality persists, and when resources are limited, women are at the end of the line. So the resources will be divided in such a manner that women always will be in the last in the line. So how do we ensure that? But I also had a few other questions that Devesh has pointed out. As he said, that if you marry a cook, then of course the GDP doesn't take care anymore about that working women anymore. But the GDP also doesn't, as they say, segregate women. When we talk about 16% women only could retain their jobs and 60% men could retain their. I think I would like to then demystify that 16% also. Who were those 16% women who could retain their jobs? I think we really need to take care of that, because were they young women? We find that women, till she is married, or to be more specifically, till she has a child, is on a level playing field. She's as competitive as any other, and she can give back very fast. The scenario changes when she becomes a mother. Then she takes a step backward, because then there are some things involved. And even if she doesn't look after her husband, or she thinks, ki, okay, there the parity is, when it comes to children, she really has to take a reflection many times. Or that is the time when you make a woman feel very guilty for leaving her child at home and being such a productive woman. And there are sneers saying, oh, she may be very productive, but is she a good mother? I have doubts about that. So those enunciations that comes. And then what about senior women? So I think if you distinguish women into three categories, as to women who with children and women without children, then you will find that majority of the women who could retain their jobs, I'm sure, would be women without children. So then the whole problem comes is, as Devesh has said, that you have to give a lot of facilities to women. I think it's not a matter of facilities. I think women have a lot of burden to carry with themselves. Man is only for himself. He is the breadwinner. He doesn't have to do anything. Paisa diya, ghar gaya, jaake so gaya. Aur mahilaएं, women never for herself. Children, family, in-laws, समाज, परिवार, पूरा मतलब पता नहीं किस किस का बोझ उसके कंधे पर है. So she carries a lot of burden. She is never for herself. If you make it a level playing field कि बस आज से आपको बाल बच्चा किसी को नहीं देखना है, तो I think we'll win the post any day. The other thing is paid and unpaid work. The moment you take the unpaid women work into account in your economic surveys, you will find a reverse trend. You will find that, okay, even only in low paid jobs, but women would be on a higher level than men as far as jobs are concerned. But then we never acknowledge the household work that women are doing. And I would really like to ask the question, why? We talk about gender equality. Why is there no gender equality in economic surveys as far as women's productivity or her productive worth is concerned? I think it's time we really looked at that barrier, because the moment we say that women are not working, then you go in a different direction altogether. And when you start acknowledging the contribution of, the economic contribution of women, whether she's within her household or outside, I think the scenario changes drastically.
That this must be counted as paid labor.
Yeah, but still, there seems to be
it's not
some resistance somewhere. And the other thing, which is again, I think, more a question of socialization. As they said, ki when we had a very divided society, there was a term we were all, I think we all were taught in school. It was called Sanskritization. That is, like, the lower castes generally adopted the so-called social norms of the higher caste and behaved in a particular manner to be more accepted in society, so that there cannot be more discrimination against them. So they behaved in a manner which was thought to be the best way. When women come out in the job market, I think men need to be trained as to how to work with women in the first place. Men are very uncomfortable if a woman is your boss. They don't know how to behave. They don't know what to do, what to say, what not to say. I personally have a lot of issues about everybody just looking at me and saying कि sir कहें कि madam कहें, so you end up having all sorts of things. And I say कि ठीक है यार, sir कह लो कोई दिक्कत नहीं है, madam कह लो कोई दिक्कत नहीं है, बस आगे तो बढ़ो. तो वहीं पे पहले अटक जाती है कहानी. The other thing is, if you have a very vocal subordinate, I think men really don't know how to handle a very professional woman. They are like, I'm sorry to say that, they are scared shit. They just don't know क्या करें. बाप रे, इस महिला का क्या करें, ये तो बहुत बोलती है, बहुत वोकल है, और मतलब इसको तो समझाना भी मुश्किल है, मतलब अपनी राइट्स के प्रति भी बड़ी सजग लगती है, तो मतलब दैट इज़ एन इशू. आई थिंक दैट इज़ ऑल्सो समथिंग वी नीड टू लर्न. Then how to deal with professional women, as Sugandha ji just said, that when we enter somebody's room, they just look at us as women, not as professionals. And I think as women, when men enter our rooms, we hardly even look up to see how good looking or how bad looking that person is, well dressed or not. I think we've given up long ago. So we hardly bother, but we do look professionally about what they are saying, and we are very much attuned to what they are saying to us rather than how they look. But I think women, the first impression is how we're always ki shape, size, color, kaisi lag rahi hai, kaisi nahi lag rahi hai. I think the attitude changes. And then the whole question of, if you really want women to be more into the job market, then I think somewhere down the line we also need to know how to treat women. आंटी कहें, बहन जी कहें, मैडम कहें, सर कहें, कहें क्या? I've hardly seen anybody on the street calling somebody uncle ji. But I think any women about a particular age, वो तो आंटी बन ही जाती है. अच्छा, and I find even professionally, when I go to many places, being an IS officer also, the average person on the street doesn't know how to address. वो आदमियों को तो सर बोल लेता है, लेकिन महिलाओं को आज भी आंटी जी के आगे उसको समझ ही में नहीं आता है कि इनको बोलें क्या, चाची, मतलब माता जी. So I think we really need to make people learn कि okay, अगर कोई महिला घर के बाहर है तो वो तुम्हारी आंटी, चाची और मामी नहीं होगी, उसको भी मैडम या सर कहना पड़ सकता है, और आपको उससे रिश्तेदारी नहीं बनानी है. मतलब let her be. She doesn't want to create any relation. ना वो आपकी चाची बनने को तैयार है, ना आपको गोद में लेने को तैयार है आंटी के रूप में. Let her be. तो those issues also need to be. I think this is something which I speak from personal experiences also, and I think हम लोग औरतों को बहुत बुरा लगता है जब कोई आंटी बोलता है. तो दादी बोल लो यार, वो भी ठीक है, एटलीस्ट रिस्पेक्टफुली तो बोलोगे. मतलब उतना रिस्पेक्ट आज भी पेट्रियार्कल सोसाइटी में है कि नानी दादी के लिए रिस्पेक्ट रहता है, मगर आंटी आंटी मतलब. So just on a lighter vein, just to make everybody laugh, otherwise gender is such a thing that half the men folk also go to sleep कि बाप रे आज तो औरतों को झेलने का दिन आ गया है. But then we need more men like Devesh. And I think we need more women everywhere, because the mere presence of women makes men better behaved. I really think that is very true. But then coming to that whole thing, if women are not literate, if she's not even going to school, then finding a job for her becomes very, very difficult. Just to sum up on that thing. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for actually bringing the importance of language. Because I think feminists have been talking about how language changes, right? So when you look at multiplicity of genders and you're trying to understand multiplicity and diversity, engaging with language first to create that tokery full of what do you address when you come to a woman with authority who's not framed under the traditional sort of, because it's not as if women are not given power, right? They are given power. Like when you were mentioning about patriarchy, it is that the older...
Just one thing I forgot. And the other problem with women is that a man is always a mister. But with a woman, it always comes Miss, Mrs., divorcee, whatever. मतलब the person is confused. इसको बोलें क्या? I think उस पे भी कुछ एक debate करके कह लो कि यार Miss कह लो या Mrs. कह लो. You missed her, somebody got her. मतलब Miss ही कह लो. I think that's a much better idea of saying it, rather than अच्छा वो भी confusion हो जाती है, उसके चलते भी बहुत परेशानी होती है. तो a way of addressing women, how do you address a woman, whatever her age, shape, size, उसको एक तरह से ही बात करिए. I think that will go a long way in maybe helping women step out of the house.
Yes, and also I think...
One more thing, linked to what she's saying, is very important even in government communications. Letterheads, when you send out a letter from the center to the states, from the states to the districts and all, you'll generally find, men everywhere down the line, and in terms of, you'll never find he/she or, she, he. You don't find that. So those kind of things, it really need lot of training and orientation at that level, even what, taking from ma'am to begin from that.
Yeah, and the
And Mr. never
institutional-
tells you whether the guy is married or not. And I think, how does it matter? I think we are all individuals there. We are not basically IS officers or anywhere because of our marital status. So I think there is time you should have a unisexual kind of a thing. If it is Mr., let it be then Mr. and Mr. for women also. We don't mind. And if it is Mrs., I'm sure the other half will definitely mind not to be called Mrs. But we are okay if we are called Mr. Harjot Kaur or no point.
Just a few additional point I would say. It's a very important point, ma'am, you have raised. You know, it also goes to the form when they do not ask the mother's name. They're always the father's name. So where is this identity lying, as you said, in the government letterhead, and also when there are forms, and you see all the government forms or even the private, they ask about the mother's name. Even with the farmers, when we collect the data, we never ask the name of the husband, name of the wife. We always ask the name of the husband. So that's also a very, very important point.
Don't ensure it. Even in my son's school, it still says Hardeep Singh, son of Deepak Kumar Singh. Mother doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Aadhaar, for once, they brought that change. Thankfully.
Also.
Know that maternity is certainty, paternity is an accident. But still, maternity is never certain, paternity is certain. वो that is more important कि किसका बेटा है. किसने पैदा किया, that is, doesn't seem to be. On a lighter vein, thank you very much, Nivedita.
We'll move on because we have.
just one.
Sure, go ahead.
At least take note of is, we of course have this as a women empowerment issue, but to me, when you're talking about work and unpaid work, it's also very important to talk about the third gender, which, in terms of policies, in terms of disabled population, it's not that, of course we have spoken about, homogeneous and, heterogeneous kind of, but it's very important to link that as well, persons with disabilities, you have, so that extra disadvantage has to be taken, note of.
Okay. So on that note, I think because we have, I think about 10 minutes. 10 minutes. We have 10 minutes, and I'd like to actually use 10 minutes? Yes. So I'd like to take that time actually to skip the second bit on hunger. You can address it if you'd like. But I think I want to actually have a conversation on freedom. Because I think most, if not all women, we map our freedom based on where the sun is in the sky. Because if the sun isn't in the sky, we have to make different kinds of calculations as to our mobility, as to our ideas of safety, regardless of whether the reality of safety is present or not, because we do know that women are likely to face violence within the home than outside. And yet there is the demonization of public space. We are not legitimate citizens in the public space. So our freedom of who we want to be, and this is going back to what Paramita was saying about who we are, right? It is not just that we become essential beings as women, but there is also a spectrum of genders. It is not just men, women, and the third gender, right? There is also a spectrum out there. And what does that mean for women who are not women, women who are don't have mammary glands, who don't have a vagina? What does that mean for, what does freedom mean? And I think I'd like to actually have yes, a philosophical and an academic discussion as well, but also I think vision making. I would like to know what freedom means for all of you and what it looks like for all of you. And I'll start with Ashmita.
Thanks. Again, coming back, I think this question is also related to what we have been talking about earlier. I think the biggest definition of freedom would mean a woman controlling important resources or making important decisions rather than, these issues of mobility and other things are also important, but we have to understand that those are based on the nature of society that we live in and the kind of economic, social, and political framework that we are talking about, which can be different in terms of different countries and contexts, and within countries also it would be very different in Bihar than Gujarat. But ultimately, I think the true nature of women's freedom would be once she becomes the man of the house, or that terminology. Yeah, in quotes. So I would just like to quote a very interesting research which is of US, and it's again historical in nature. And so this study found that once, due to Second World War, there was a lot of male mortality, and due to which all the women were left behind who were sort of forced to go to work. And this study sort of examines what were the differences that happened. And we do find that once women became the primary decision makers in the household, there were tremendous changes in the way they thought, the way they operated. There were like lot of changes in their empowerment, and at the same time they started using household gadgets. So an entire so they had to go out to work. So even, so like these issues of gender inequality, we have to understand these are not specific problems only of Bihar or India. These exist all over the world, even in developed countries with 100% literacy and education. And there also women bear unequal burden of work. So one of the reasons why these questions of unpaid work and other things are, so these always repeatedly come in ILO, and ILO has not taken this up as a formal definition, is that this is not a specific problem of India. It exists all over the world. And even given, so we can just include that definition of Code 93 in definition of work, and we say that 90% of our workforce or 99% of our women are employed. But that is not the point. The point is, like, what kind of employment is it? Is it empowering? Does it give them rights and other things? And are they making their own decisions? So basically, I think once they start making major decisions, and they are not secondary workers who are like stopgap people who go into the labor force only when it is extremely important, they would only get true freedom in that sense. How would that happen? There are various ways in which that can happen. One is government policies. You focus on right kind of policies. So there could be various ways, and Devesh ji right now mentioned that there are some specific legislations. So in some of my own work, we find that there are specific legislations which were there in the industry where women were not allowed to work in night shifts, and that led to massive amounts of distortions. Like you were saying that women were considered to be more costly workers because the shifts could not be rotated. So if you hire a woman, you cannot rotate her in night shift, then you prefer to just lay her off. Then similar kind of things we find in maternity benefits, or even inheritance laws. For example, this very important paper by Sonia Bhalotra and others finds that when inheritance rights are given to women, that is actually leading to more female feticides. So whenever government frames policies, we should take into consideration the evidence that we already have and think very carefully that just by imposing policies would not change per se the entire socio-economic framework. So it is much more deeper, and it's beyond just gender issues. It's a greater economic issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashmita. I have to go.
Point, because you raised about the third gender. I was recently talking to a person of the third gender, and they had a very pertinent point to say. In government, I think when we talk about transgender development, there is an issue that we treat them as transgender. You have to register yourself as a transgender if you want to take any benefits. And the person concerned was saying we should be given the freedom. Half of the transgender community thinks of them as women, and then are many transgender who think of themselves as men. So if you think yourself to be a woman, then you should be allowed to register as a woman. If you think yourself to be a man, then you should be allowed to register as a man. Then this whole problem of being registered as a transgender itself is, I think, unfreedom for them. So that is a pertinent point, just wanted to say. Thank you.
I mean, she has already mentioned, you know, it's about the choice, it's about decision making, it's about the desire, and I think it's also about partnership and participation. It's, I somehow don't agree to this, you know, you have to become the man of the household. I mean, because we are really talking about equality. If that is the thing, I think partnership is the better kind of, I mean, to me, it's, I mean, that's a better way of looking at it. Like, we do have elections in 5 states. So freedom, of course, women do vote. They have that right. But in terms of freedom, I mean, whether paid, unpaid, whichever sector they are, you know, professional at whatever level, you know, how many women will actually go out and vote depending on their own, you know, choice, or that can make a decision. That's also a thing. So how politically literate, as ma'am is saying, you know, how politically, so freedom that way is important. In terms of work, one important thing, I mean, very few, of course, I mean, from personal experience, there's a kind of a, what should I say, loose relationship between, you know, son preference and paid work outside. So, you know, enhancing the status within the household, and then, okay, you go do this. But then if you have a daughter, I mean, these are very like sociological kind of thing, but in terms of freedom, these actually somehow, you know, translate and make lives better, or whatever status quo. So these are the things. And now this International Women's Day, when we have choose to challenge is the theme for the International Women's Day, I think it's high time, you know, we need to challenge some of these, I mean, whatever it is, the realities that we face.
Thank you so much. Actually, in this conference, I think last 2 years ago now, it feels like a long time, Devika Jain was saying that, you know, comparing women's statistics to men's statistics is a very poor standard, that we can go beyond that. It doesn't have to be that parity means only comparing to something that you've set. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. So anyone else who would like to talk about?
Already both of you have pointed that point of decision making and power. I'd say that it's also about strategic control over their own lives to take decision. It's very, very important. You have to have the strategic control over your own lives. And second most important would be your power to negotiate with your relationship, whatever relationship you have, you want to renegotiate with. That's very important for the freedom. And as Mr. Devesh put it very well, you have to understand freedom also in the subsets. So for me, when I was in the village studying, for me, freedom is to come to Patna. And you know, the Cycle Yojana, I'm a big fan. And of course, by ending this on freedom, I would say Bihar as a state is one of the examples which I also put forward in the World Economic Forum when it comes about the steps to be taken to empower women. The beautiful schemes, and so the freedom to choose who I am and my identity. That's freedom for me. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
When we speak of the word freedom, I'm typically, again, being from an economics background, I go back to economics time and again. Freedom to, when we talk of, forget gender, I'm talking across the human civilization. Freedom would mean freedom of choices, right? When you talk of choices, choices will be the entire array of choices that we have. It could be social choices, it could be cultural choices, it could be economic choices. And when I talk of choice, it's not just a irrational choice. It's a choice which any reasonable and a rational mind with the best set of information would have made. So if we are talking of freedom, so when we're talking of freedom, it's not just the legislative framework which allows, you know, the woman to make a choice. No. It would also mean that we give that adequate resource so that the choice is reasoned, which any normal human rational mind would have otherwise made. So that's, the scheme of choices is where I would place freedom in terms of, where what we would discuss. I would also look at, quite often when we talk of freedom, we like to put the cart before the horse. We say we look at economic development, we look at, major parity and goals and things like those. I would say that much of, when we talk of freedom in terms of the women, much of it has its trace of its origins in the social and the social cultural history, the social culture and the religious strictures that are there, that exist across the religions. Okay, so that kind of codifies, that kind of allows a disparity and an unfreedom to work unfettered, unabated, unchecked. So if we were to look at solving this conundrum, we should look at addressing it from the socio-cultural and the religious point of view also. We cannot treat it independently in an economic sphere or in terms of merely in terms of our lives or in terms of how things go on. We have to look at addressing it from the source. So when just for the sake of simplicity, when the Hindu Code Bill was introduced in 1955, the amount of remonstrance that was there across this country is unbelievable today. Yet it was brought about, and to some extent it did address a few of the core issues. So when we are talking of freedom, then we got to also look at the legislative subsets, and we should address the socio-cultural and the religious issues also. We cannot let go and say that part is something, it's sacrosanct. It's not biblical. It isn't. It can't be. Okay, that's one. When I think of freedom of choices, I also would, quite honestly, given the across the world, it's even for sub-Saharan Africa, even for India, even for the rest, even for the developed world, freedom from violence of all kinds is something which hits my mind very starkly. And when we talk of violence, it's just not the physical violence alone. It also encompasses the entire spectrum or the array of whatever is the subconscious or what would you say as the behind the scenes violence, right? What is visible, what is not visible. So freedom from that, I would say, should be on our priority in terms of policymakers, in terms of society as a whole. When we talk of legislative framework towards this freedom, the norms, the policies, the acts, as someone has rightly pointed, somehow tend to, I do not say this with affirmative voice across the board, but largely they somehow tend to reinforce the stereotypes. If the legislative framework has to address this issue of freedom, then it must move outside of this stereotype. It is only then that the freedom as in terms of the choices that I was talking of would come. When we talk of freedom again in terms of women, all said and done, I would say health as a choice should be something that should come almost on the top of the 4 or 5 lists in terms of women. For men also it would apply, but given the current state of affairs, I would rate it on a higher pedestal right now. Finally, if you were to ask me freedom, again, I just go back to what I said. I don't see them, I don't see women as one subset or one set as a whole. I would talk of the invisible woman. Invisible woman is a woman whom I don't see here. I do not see in my office space. Quite often I don't see in my family. Okay? Invisible woman is a woman who we discuss, the unpaid labor, whom we discuss as doing the domestic chores, whom we discussed as doing the manual scavenging and yet not getting anything out of it. We talked of the invisible woman as a woman who doesn't get any award, who is just not a part of our discussions at all. So when I talk of freedom, I would like to address that invisible woman to begin with. So this is what my understanding of freedom would be. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I would like to push back a little bit on the rational choice bit, because I think that when women are making choices, for example, for standing for elections, they're not necessarily making rational choices, because everything that has been told to them, or even if they become leaders or become surgeons or become air pilots or anything that goes against any kind of convention, they are told repeatedly that this is not for them. Violence is, violence is what they face. They face derision, they face all kinds of things. It is not necessarily rational for women to make those choices. In fact, they are making irrational choices. And I'm saying that maybe we can move beyond, we should have women making irrational choices, even if it, because I think, I think so. It is completely subjective. Also, I think that we don't ask men to make rational choices. I mean, drinking your entire yearly salary away is not a rational choice, and yet men are not necessarily, I mean, yes, they are disparaged, but they don't suffer anything for it. So allowing, I think, that kind of, yeah, I mean, let women be also stupid. You know, they don't have to be strong all the time. Let them have all kinds of, she's coming to sort of cut me off, but I just want to, oh.
Can be stupid, she can be selfish.
Yes, they can be selfish, they can be completely sort of, they don't have to take care of their families, they don't, oh, they can't hear me either. I can shout, I'm quite loud. Yeah. So I think for me at least, the freedom is to be free to be anything, right? So all the bad spectrums, let them be villains, right? Let them be villains in our stories. Let them not be just the ones that, rise from the ashes to become phoenixes. Let them be crows, right? Willy and smart and, yeah, exactly. So I actually, sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to end the session. I would permit a small story because I think what Devesh is talking about is absolutely right. I would like to talk about a story of an invisible woman who I met 3 days ago in UP. I was sitting she was doing katai. She has she's a woman who has a small farm. It's not in her name, it's in her husband's name. Husband never goes into the field. Peas are ripe. I don't know if it's true in Bihar as well. Green chana and matar is in season. Hara chana and matar is in season. So she's doing katai. And so she asked me, because I had gone to visit, she couldn't meet with me. So she said, come to my field. And so I sat there and we were doing, as usual, like person come from city. So you just keep feeding them chana until you're like completely full. And what she was telling me, I said, okay, so what will happen? What will you do? Because the husband is not anywhere in the picture, right? So I said, so how much will you sell it for? And she said, I will do the katai, I will sow this, I will even make arrangements for harvesting, I will cut, I will dry it, I will weigh it, he will sell it, he will have a party with the money, he will drink and he will eat and he will have a party of some sort with other men, and whatever is left is what I will have for the rest of the year. Now, she was crying after a bit when she was saying this because she is helpless, and I think that she was angry. But maybe that was my anger, because I am so angry. Like for the last 3 days, I've been carrying this anger with me, and I feel like, it might be naive to be this angry because sometimes Jyotsna and I have a discussion about, it's like this, like I work in domestic violence, right? It's been like this 20 years when I started, and it's still like this. So I feel like my anger is impotent, but I'm still impatient. I think I'm impatient because I think I have hope. I have hope that someday that woman will have her land, she will have she will have her belly full, and she will be here talking about her story. She will not need me to tell her story. she will have a platform like this that she can tell her own story. And so I thank all of you who are also here representing the other invisible actors, and I thank you also for bringing that issue into the, because I think we cannot forget that we are only here by accident. It really is. And so I thank all of you, and I wish all of us a happy International Women's Day, and let's all be angry together a little bit.
Ma'am.
Yeah, thank you all for a wonderful set of discussions.
Yes. Just your last word. What ma'am just said right now in terms of the rational and irrational choices. When we say rational choices, the choice is a word which comes on the priority of it. Okay, freedom equals choice. So, to be able to have a rational mind, to be able to build a capacity where you can, any human being can take a rational decision. The decision which a human being, any normal rational human being would have taken. And to the ability to move beyond that. So when I talk of choice, it's not that, it's an informed choice is what I wish to speak. So informed choice, beyond that the decision can be rational, it can be irrational, it can be stupid, it can be whatever. But informed choice is where, when we talk of rationality in terms of the capacity of the state or the capacity of society to give that information to any subset, to men, women, child, even for the children for that matter. For children who are minors, I mean for the kids, for the younger lot, for those of them who are between say 12 to 18. So that information, the ability to take that choice and move beyond that choice is what I would have wanted to say. Thank you.